Okay, we've more or less finished topic 3 in terms of my lecturing and so on. What we'll do today is a kind of discussion, thinking activity that relates to topic 3. And then on Wednesday we shall have, well, technically 2 presentations, but I suspect it's going to be just one. And then on Friday, as you know, we have the final exam. Does anyone have any questions about the exam? Any things you wish to ask? Was it all clear? You've all got the guide I prepared?
Still 2 hours, right?
Yeah, we'll stick with 2 hours. It's fine. You're just doing 2 things. Okay, so 2 hours.
There's no need to be so strict about the time constraint, right? I mean, I think you can give us an extra, a little, come on, sir, I don't know, like 10 minutes or 15 minutes, please.
Well, yeah, okay. In my experience, however long I make an exam, there are 3 or 4 people out of 30 or 40 who are left here at the end. Most people leave earlier than the end. They don't use the full 2 hours or 3 hours or 2.5 hours, whatever it is. So we'll start as early as possible, put it that way. Okay, we'll do our best and so on. Any other comments or requests about the exam? Any other suggestions? No? Okay. But as I said, let me know if you have any questions. We can deal with those before Friday. Okay. Someone remind me what some of the very general features of the monotheistic religions we identified at the beginning of this topic. Some of the things which are common, similar to most and usually all of these religions, though in slightly different ways. There's obviously one very big one, but there are...
And only God, obviously.
Yeah, okay, so we have one God, we said. What else did I suggest in my lecture, in our lovely PowerPoint show? What other things are similar in most or all religions, monotheistic religions? One God, obviously, that's by definition, so it's a circular thing, because you have to come back to one God anyway. What else did I say?
There's always a messenger.
Right. We can say some kind of prophet or... And what normally happens... Sorry?
They are always male.
Right, okay.
Sound like piercing as women sometimes.
Yeah, well, history has been fairly sexist until the 20th century, so most people who've achieved things in history have been men. That doesn't mean that women can't achieve things, but society is that way. So quite naturally, religions have tended to be sexist as well. So yes, they're men, that's true. What happens to these prophets, these messengers? All right, okay. They have a holy book. And kind of how do we get from here to here? What happens? What's the process? Revelation, yeah, okay. We said in most cases, in one form or another, not in all of them, they're all a bit different, there is something called revelation, where the special guy, the prophet, the messenger, or whatever, has some contact with God in some form, okay, receives the truth is revealed, shown to him, not usually her, as we've said, and this ends up in somewhere or other as part of, or the whole thing of a holy book, okay, and that's what we've been kind of discussing and we've seen. What we're going to look at today are accounts, descriptions of 2 monotheistic, I suppose, revelations, and we're going to kind of read them and then try and compare them and think a little bit about what this means and so on. So how many people in the class? We've got 7 of you, so I'm going to split you down in half, which means someone's got to get chopped in half, don't I? We'll have 4 and 3, okay? So let's say, okay, you 4, it could be one group, and then you 3 can be another, okay? So let's give this text to the threesome, and this one will go to the 4 team. So, the 4 team have got a more recent summary of the experience of Guru Nanak, okay, with a sort of an account of what happened, and then some of the kind of revelations poems that are part of that, or seem to be part of that, okay. This is Guru Nanak, the founder of Sikhism, as you remember, and what's supposed to have happened to him. The other 3, we go further back in time to the revelation to Zoroaster, Zerdusht, okay. We mentioned him briefly the other day. So not a modern monotheistic religion. This is something going back thousands of years, probably, though the exact date of Zoroaster is debated by scholars. But this also is a similar kind of revelation. So what I want you to do is, firstly, to read your text, and our friend Emre will cut the video at this point, and then to think a little bit about it in your groups, okay, to try and think out what are the main features. I'll explain more of that when we get to that point. And then the group will summarize and describe what they've read, what their ideas are, each group, and then we'll try and put those together and think about what it means, okay. So we're doing kind of historical research, but also what we might call comparative history, because we're comparing things. And I'll think a little bit about how we can compare things in the past as well. And we look at these both as kind of holy accounts, holy books, whatever you want to call them, but also, obviously, we have to think, are they historical documents? That's one of the questions we asked a couple of weeks ago when we started this topic. Okay, so you've got a full page in each case. May take 10 or 15 minutes. There'll be some strange names and some difficult words. Please put your hand up and ask me. You can also, at this point, I'm not going to be going quiet. You can also speak together to other people in the group if you want to work out what you think things mean and so on. Okay. We've got a 4th person. Okay. Okay. Sibyl, you come here. We're in 2 groups at the moment, reading texts. So this can be the one you. So you're with these 3. So now we have 4-4. That's very nice. Okay, I like things to be symmetrical and even and things like that. So 50 minutes or so, or as long as it takes, to read and understand this, and then I'll give you some things to discuss together for, again, 10 minutes or something like that. Then we'll start to bring these ideas together. Okay, make a start, and we'll chat again shortly. Okay, let's move on. Firstly, before we begin, let me just say a few things again about Zoroastrianism. We've talked about Sikh religion, and we shall have our presentation on Wednesday about that. Zoroastrianism, I mentioned briefly the other day, but I should say a bit more because you're not so familiar with it. It could be, we can argue about these things, but Zoroastrianism, in theory, could be one of the oldest monotheistic religions from an historical perspective, though exactly how monotheistic it is or was is something which kind of people debate. And even the date of when Zoroaster, their prophet, was alive is not so clear. Okay, some people say 3,000 years ago or so, others say he lived more recently. So there is some disagreement about that, and even where he lived, whether he lived in what is now Iran or whether he lived in Central Asia, where all the Turkic people now live, is also debated. But what he appears to have done, what he seems to have done, again from an historical perspective, not from the perspective of a believer, is he took the polytheistic religion of the ancient Iranians and he began to make it more monotheistic in a way. because we talk about polytheism, many gods, monotheism, one God, as if they're black and white things, but there's lots of grey areas in between. People don't just sort of stop being polytheistic and in the morning wake up and say, oh, I feel very monotheistic today, there's only one God. Things happen gradually. Like, for example, you have many gods, but you say one God is more important than the others. That's one of the steps, the stages on becoming perhaps more monotheistic. Or you say there are lots of gods, but they're all part of one as well, in a way. They're all different aspects of one. We could say the Trinity, perhaps we discussed in Christianity or something like that. What seems to have happened, because we can compare Zoroastrianism with the old Indian religion, which is very close, the polytheistic Indian religion, is that he took the gods that his people were worshipping, and he said, okay, there's one big guy, there's the main guy, Ahura Mazda, or Mazda as we have there. He's kind of God. And all the other gods are just less important beings, spiritual beings, and these are different kinds of angels, okay, which we've got here. Okay, the archangels, the Spentas are the most important ones, and the one mentioned in your text is Vohuman. And they each have a kind of special thing to do for God, but they are below God. So it's a hierarchy with, at the top, God, and then the angels, Melech, of different kinds below that. Okay, and he's just kind of taken lots of gods and then moved them around, said one at the top and the others are not really gods, they're angels, and so on. You could say that's putting it very simply. Also, Zoroastrianism is dualistic, so it emphasizes God and the devil, Ahriman, okay, as kind of rival spiritual, ancient spiritual beings, except in the end, if we help, if humans help, God, Ahura Mazda, will win and defeat the devil, and then there will only be Ahura Mazda, so then there will just be the one God, in a sense. And some people in Iran, but also people living in Bombay in India, still follow this religion. It's quite small in terms of the world, but when the Arabs came into Iran bringing Islam, most Iranians became Muslim. Some of them ran away, mostly men, because they've studied the genetics of people in Bombay. It was mostly the men who fled away, sailed down to India, and then carried on being Zoroastrians there, and their descendants still live there today. And obviously you get small groups of them living elsewhere in the world. Okay, so let's begin with some kind of basic chronology, summary of what you've been reading. So can someone from the Zoroaster group, we'll start with them, because they're older. The religion is older, not you are older. I don't know what your ages are. I mean, the religion is older. Can you tell us very briefly what the main stages of this account is? What are the main things that are going on in this little story or revelation, or whatever? One of you can decide to be the spokesperson, but the others can obviously help him or her if they wish. Who's going to be spokesman? Woman?
Spokeswoman.
Yeah. You want a spokeswoman, do you? Right. What about the ladies? They want a spokeswoman or a spokesman? All right, okay.
Firstly, this is a special day, Dadvopalam Mitra. This is the day which Zoroaster became baptized.
Okay.
Now how can I say that?
Don't ask me, I'm not so good on my Pahlavi pronunciation either, but yeah, Daitya or something like that.
We thought that it's baptizing.
Right, well, water is involved. I've put water here. I mean, baptism technically is obviously the Christian thing, but water is... yeah, we're going to come to that. Let's not jump ahead of ourselves, okay? Non-spokesperson, but we'll... I've put water there, okay? We'll come back to this point later on. Okay, water. Okay, Burun.
And then there's 4 stages. After he come up from the water, he meet Archangel Volman. And duality, he thinks about duality concept because of hair though?
Yeah, let's explain. The Vohuman is one of these archangels, and he wears his hair in a strange way. We're not clear what it means. What does it say in the text? Curve-tailed or something. We think maybe the hair is sticking out on either side to represent the two sides of the universe, the good and the bad or something. He has a funny hairstyle anyway. Okay, carry on.
And the woman take him to meet other archangels and gods.
Right.
The assembly of the spirits.
It's like going to an interview for a job or something, really, isn't it?
And assembly was in Iran, and in here he meet with the god or
Yeah, Hormazd. Yeah, Ahura Mazda is the original form.
and he discussed some moral and spiritual issues with God.
Right. Okay, and that's more or less it there. We don't have the bit here afterwards, in a sense. Okay. All right. Guru Nanak, team, one of you, bless you again, Jok Yasha, can one of you summarize what you have there, see how similar and how different it is from what we've just heard from Tujé and the Zoroastrians? Come on. We're going to have a spokeswoman or a spokesman this time. Kim? Okay, good. Well, we had a woman last time. Now we can have a guy. Okay, that's nice and fair. Okay.
In ordinary day, Nanak was disappeared. Nanak disappeared in the forest and was taken to God's.
Okay, what was he doing in the forest?
He was better.
Yeah, bathing. Okay, carry on.
And in God's presence, they start to spoke each other.
Okay, let's put this one, sorry. And what kind of things do they discuss?
The main point is in that we haven't understand everything.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. Okay, well, maybe we can come back to that. So then there is a discussion, a dialogue,
Yes.
we could say, between God and
The music of heaven. And then after 3 days, he suddenly appeared
yeah.
and he came back to Earth.
Yeah, well, I put Earth there, that's kind of, yeah.
And the people around him asked questions about what he was did in these 3 days. He didn't answer any question. And then he became silent for one day. The people around him think that it's the result of the abandonment of this world. After one day, the Christ and the religious people came around him and said that there is no
Yeah, okay. So after a period of silence, he makes his famous statement, there is no Hindu and no Muslim, whose path shall I follow, and the things that we mentioned before. Okay, so we can draw a line there. That's pretty much where that ends. Okay, so what have we got here then? What can we look at here in terms of similarities, differences, and so on? Similarities first. Anyone can? Okay, yeah, I've deliberately kind of mentioned that, and I asked Jamberk about what happens in the forest. But yes, there is the role of water is important. Where else in religions can we think of water as important? We mentioned one before. Okay, Christianity, baptism, and so on. When Muslims go to pray in a mosque, what do? You do your ablution, your what's the technical term in English? It's called abdest, isn't it? Which is ab, which means water in Persian, and dest means hand, dust. So water is obviously a very important symbol for different religions, okay? And in these two cases, water is involved in the process of the prophet going up to meet God, okay? So it's something that the guy passes through or something. Well, yeah, self-enlightenment, or in this case, they believe it's enlightenment from the God, but obviously the water is somehow to do with cleaning and maybe purging the person, as we have deliberately in the case of Islam. You can't pray until you've washed your feet and so on. You're clean, therefore. Here, it's a bigger process of becoming clean, in a sense. Water is obviously the way to become clean. And yes, there is a discussion. We can maybe say dialogue, as I said. And we'll come back to that shortly. Big difference, which I've deliberately tried to show there, between the two. In Sikhism, it's kind of straight to God, okay? But in the Zoroastrian story, first he meets Vahuman, who asked him a few questions. Who are you? Where do you come from? Kind of thing. And then he gives his reply. This is, okay, you've passed the test. You can come and meet the other angels and Ahura Mazda and God. So there's a kind of intermediary there in a way. Interestingly enough, of course, in Islam, how does the Prophet Muhammad receive his revelations from God? Through an angel, okay? Yeah, Gabriel, okay, in the original Jewish form and so on. So there's an angel as a kind of intermediary, as a middleman between the prophet and God, as opposed to, in this one, you get the kind of direct contact between the prophet and God. We mentioned similarity, but we don't have to take it any further at this stage and so on. And here, partly because of the checks I chose and was able to edit, we don't have, it doesn't tell us what happens to Zoroaster after, of course, but people will be wondering what happened to him and so on, and be asking questions as well. Tujay?
Also, Ahura Mazda says there's no, this is not important, so what you think, what you do, what you believe, only important thing is to be a good person, but in no Muslim, no, there's some difference.
Okay, yeah, let's come back to that. That's an interesting point. We're kind of running out of time for this class, so we might have a break now, and then we'll carry on our discussions and comparisons afterwards. But the things they say, the dialogue they have, what I've said here, relationship between prophet and God, we can follow up as well. So it is more or less time for a break. So let's stop there, and we'll have another kind of 20 minutes or so after the break. And then after that, you have the joy of filling in the course evaluation things, which, of course, I've never had the joy of doing because I'm not a Bill Kent student, but we shall finish early so that you can do that, okay? Okay, you're all still here, so you don't need to sign this. I'll just put ×2, so we know what we've got. You know that for the New Year festival Nowruz, fire is an important element. You have those guys in Easter Turkey jumping over burning tires and things like that. It goes back to these people because there are many things in the world which we must protect, which are good things created by Ahura Mazda, and each of the archangels has a special concern with one of these things, and humans must try to protect these things. But as soon as these things were created, Ahriman the devil started trying to destroy them. So, for example, we have Earth, but if Earth is not protected, it becomes desert, sand. Okay, so that's the negative side of that. And fire is important. We use that for cooking and keeping warm and other things like that. It's important for us. But Ahriman created smoke, duman, the negative side, the bad side of that. Okay, so there are a number of these elements. The fire is one of the most important ones, and it goes back to this way of thinking and so on. For example, we talked about what you do with a dead body a couple of weeks ago with reference to the Sikh religion, I think, or whatever. For these people, they don't burn it because the dead body is bad. You can't burn the body because you're mixing something good, which is fire, with a dead body. You can't put a dead body under the ground because you're corrupting the earth. So they just leave the body exposed to sort of disintegrate. And of course, in a hot steppe land like Central Asia, okay, where you have lots of mountains, you can do that kind of thing, and very quickly the body will just kind of disappear and you'll just have the dried bones left. In a kind of wet place like England, it wouldn't be a good idea. It would cause more kind of health problems, I suppose, but that's part of the explanation for their tradition and so on. It's quite interesting in that respect. Okay, so we've looked at the similarities and so differences in these revelations. I mean, we've got some strong similarities. There is the importance of water somehow, symbolically perhaps cleaning the prophet. The prophet then is taken somehow to this meeting with God. In the case of Zoroastrianism, we have the archangel as a middleman. Then they have this discussion, this dialogue, questions and answers and things like that, okay? And then the prophet receives the kind of message, what he must do and so on. What do we understand from either of these about God or the divine being? We can include the archangels for the Zoroastrians here. What kind of things, how are these spiritual beings described in these texts? Let's start with Zoroastrians again. What things do we understand about Ahura Mazda or about Vohuman from these texts? It doesn't have to be spokesperson, it can be any member of the group now can offer their suggestions.
I'd like to talk about the God, and there's some funny jokes about the archangel. I think someone else can tell you about it. God is, the funny thing is the God is not very well defined. I mean, on the contrast, the archangel is defined very good, but I think God isn't even tried to be defined, and I guess it's because it's something, I guess, so supernatural that you can't even describe something. I don't know. But he kind of emits some lights. It's bright above.
Can't you just see his own shadow?
Yeah, so bright that you can't even see your own shadow.
Yes, the archangel Vohuman is said to take on a human body, but it's a kind of giant human body, isn't it?
It's quite very handsome.
Right, yes, yes, and wearing nice clothes, or special white clothing, and the hair is described and things like that. So that's very kind of clear in that sense, whereas God is more abstract, perhaps, or something. So that's interesting. That's an interesting contrast between these two levels of the spiritual hierarchy, in a way. Okay, what do we get from any idea about what God is like from the Sikh text? What have we got from there? What descriptions have we got? We've got some important passages there.
There is one God whose name is True. God is creator and unborn, self-existent, great, immortal, enmity, and bountiful. I don't know.
What's the word? Bountiful means kind of generous, giving out, creating, making many things. Yeah, what you've got there is a slightly different translation of the Mool mantra, which we saw, I gave on the PowerPoint last week or whatever, okay? And it's meant to have been something which Guru Nanak says at the point when he meets God and has this discussion and things like that, okay? So, okay, Zoroastrians, listen. So for the Sikhs, okay, there isn't an actual description there of God looked like this or whatever, but we have the Mool mantra. You remember we saw that here, I put it up, that basic statement of kind of monotheistic belief, the description of monotheistic God. And it's supposed to have come from Guru Nanak kind of at this point probably when he meets God or whatever. So all the basic features of God, as creator, as all-powerful, all the things we discussed before, they're all stated, kind of that Mool mantra comes at that point. So the main features are not a physical description, but a characterization of what God is like, made very, very clear. Whereas the Zoroastrian one is kind of more physical or non-physical in a way. Okay, but here we have the description of the features in that sense. So there's a slight difference in the way that the two accounts are given in that sense. But the abstract nature of God seems to come out of the Zoroastrian one, as we said. We don't have physical body described so clearly, and so we need to read all the other texts to get ideas of how their view of God, probably changing over time, of course, has developed. Now, what about the dialogue, the relationship between God or Vahuman and the prophet? How is that done? In what ways do they interact in a way? Let's start with. Yep. Not related.
What's this word for thinking God in like a human in body? What they call what religion?
Well, there is. All right. Well, maybe you're thinking of this word. I don't know. To anthropomorphize. Is that it? Anthropos means man or human being in ancient Greek. And if we do anything, Disney cartoons, okay, yesterday I was watching Toy Story 3 with my kids, that is also anthropomorphization. They're taking toys, which many of them have got human shapes anyway, but they're giving them human characteristics, okay, so that they're running around and talking and so on. And this is probably what you mean, okay, when God is given human form and human personality and so on, which is true of many kind of traditional old polytheistic religions. Gods have got bodies. They're often got very big, strong bodies with maybe animal features as well, but they're kind of, you can see there's a human element to the way they behave and they have emotions and things like that. Gradually, as we get into monotheism and as monotheistic religions develop, we escape from that anthropomorphic kind of God and we have something far more abstract emerging. Okay, if you look at Judaism, okay, you can see, for example, in the very old parts of the Old Testament, it talks about God walking in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, okay, walking around. That sounds something fairly anthropomorphic, whereas in the later parts of the Old Testament, the God is a more kind of abstract one, like in Islam and things like that. You could perhaps suggest that the Jewish God has changed over time. But yeah, there is a tendency to anthropomorphize, and that's an older one which we're more and more departing from, though, as we mentioned, even in Mormon religion, they still suggest that they have bodies and things like that, so that it's not completely gone. So, yes, both of these accounts don't really have an anthropomorphic element in them too much. at least on what we've got here to read. Okay, back to the third question, and the relationship. What can we say about the relationship and how they interact, the God and the prophet? I mean, if any of us were suddenly taken up into heaven, meeting this abstract God, I don't think I'd be able to say very much at all, apart from thinking, oh dear, I got it wrong, I've been an atheist all these years, it turns out I'm wrong or whatever. But beyond that, I wouldn't be kind of putting my hand up and saying, oh, by the way, I just want to know about this eternity thing and whatever. I wouldn't be getting my notebook out and asking questions. But here we do have a discussion going on. So tell me a bit about that. Zoroastrians first. What's characteristic of the kind of encounter between Ahura Mazda, Ormazd, and Zoroaster here? Anyone? We got any ideas?
Is that between prophet and angel?
Well, there's the angel bit, and then there's a bit of with God later on, I think, as well, isn't there? But what's the main form of how they interact? Is it equal? Are they hierarchical? Are they discussing things? Are they asking questions and answering questions?
It seems that they are equal because when name is
Zoroaster, we can use the...
Zoroaster meets with God, he suddenly asks a question. In reality, if you meet the God, you should surprise or...
Well, yeah, like I was saying, it's not something that you ask straight away. But, yeah, here...
Little detail, he says there is a concept, there are angels in one side, God in one other side, and he sat down in the seat of inquirer.
Inquirer, the questioner, someone making a... If you're
I
an
guess there are some hierarchy here.
Yeah. There's levels. I mean, we've got the assembly, we've got God, and he's kind of like, it's like I said, it's almost like an interview or something for a job, and you've got the interview panel in front of you almost, or something like that.
Also, for example, it's not so rational because when you go up to meet God, first of all, you should ask why you choose me, why I'm here. But he's very normal and everything is all right.
Yes. It's
I expected that to happen.
yes. I should ask that this text, we've taken this from quite a late text, Zoroastrian text called Zadspram, which is not the earliest one. It's not from the Zend Avesta, the earliest texts, which are a bit more difficult to read. So this has a nice chronology, but by this point they've got the whole life of Zoroaster sorted out and his special birth and things like that. So like with a lot of prophets, they're describing that somehow he was always special even before he was born, and things were always pointing towards the fact that he would become a prophet. Okay, you get that with other religious figures as well. So here kind of it's okay, this is what I've been waiting for, here we are, kind of thing, where I was obviously special. And it's similar I think with traditions about Guru Nanak as well, descriptions of his life and so on. But it's interesting, it's question and answer in a sense, isn't it? And it carries on more. We've only got a short part there, but the discussion between him with the archangels, it carries on more, and they're discussing points of theology and things like that. But it's a dialogue, it's question and answer, and it seems quite normal, as we said. It's not something where you be kind of shocked or whatever, but then obviously the purpose of the text is to get some ideas across. Okay, what about with the Sikh case? How does the dialogue, how does the discussion work out there? What characteristics have we got for this one? It's a bit different. Any ideas? It's not quite discussion, is it? It's a bit different. Carry on. Well, it's sort of discussion, but not dialogue.
God said something, and Guru Nanak accept these, I think,
see what I've done here. I've made indented and made the font smaller. These are the hymns, the verses, the songs which we have from Guru Nanak in the Guru Granth Sahib, and they're connected with this encounter, with this meeting, in a sense. So they think, it's believed that he was inspired to sing these things about there is one God and all this kind of stuff at this encounter. So they're trying to find a context, in a way, for his hymns. They've got the Guru Granth Sahib, which is a big mixture of these things, and they have to say, well, where do they all come from? At what point did he say these things? And they must be part of the revelation. So he was inspired to sing these songs, and it says, what does it say? To the accompaniment of the spontaneous music of heaven. So he's with God, and suddenly he starts to sing in whatever way they have, the style they have, these, the Mool Mantra and others, and then the music from heaven kind of comes out to accompany him in a way. It was ready to join in. So there is some dialogue here. God says something, Guru Nanak says things, but then he also kind of just sings these little religious songs, these hymns as well. So it seems a bit more artificial, seems to me. It seems a bit more not so interactive in a way, a little bit different. And it's a way of finding a context, putting these special hymns of the God of Guru Nanak into a place, into a context in some way or another. Okay. All right, any other comments or suggestions here? Let's think finally a bit about comparing things. We've seen some similarities and we've seen some differences. Now, if two things look very similar or pretty much exactly the same, if two things are comparable, how can we explain that? There are different ways to explain similarity in the world, both today, but also obviously in history, though it's more difficult. So here we have two pieces of paper. They are, in fact, identical. So what's the explanation?
They are exactly the same copy of the original.
Right, okay, they've come from the same source. So in this case, it's like that. We'll say, I call these X and Y. They've come from the same source, which in this case is my computer. Okay, the original document is sitting there on my computer, and I printed these out for you, and out they come, and they are the same. Okay. If I took your notebook, one of your notebooks now, and took it, and then got my lecture notes out and took it, we would find some similarities between them, okay? Because you've been coming to class and listening to my wise words every week. So what's the process there? Why are your notes and my notes similar? Is it this? Do they come from the same source, or is it different? So how is it different? Why are your notes similar to mine?
Because there's a filter system. You said your thoughts according to also your research, but we only read this and share your thoughts, and then we filter it and then come up with sometimes same idea.
Right, okay, so I speak in class, today's different, but normal class when I have PowerPoint up here, I speak and give my lecture, which is a version of my notes. You listen and then you put your version down. So they're not identical, they're not exactly the same. It's not the same as this where they are word for word the same. But someone researching carefully would say, oh, okay, this looks very similar to what we've got in here. We've got these notes from David, we've got these notes from Erdem, and they look kind of similar or whatever. So they're obviously connected somehow. But the connection primarily in that case is like that, or slightly more complicated. We've got 2J's filter in there. But here are my notes, which I speak, and you end up taking those notes and writing your version of them down. And they get changed a little bit along the way, okay, but they end up being comparable because one has led to the other, in a sense, okay. trying to think of a good way of describing this one. Okay. I can't think of a good example now, but
The same source with different words.
trying to go through that one again. Say that again. Well, okay, this is a version. This is maybe a version, what you're, if I understand, is version of this one, where we can say this, okay? Because this is perhaps misleading. These are identical, so they are exactly the same. But also, we can get things from the same source, sometimes through different stages. There may be an A and a B stage here, but ultimately they go back to the same source. But there's been change, so they're not exactly the same. But they are still ultimately going back to there. Or there's a direct connection between them here. The other one I'm trying to think of, and I can't think of a good example of it now, is just this. Sometimes things are similar just because they are similar reactions to the same situations, problems, and people or things have come up with the same solution. Okay, okay, I'm thinking of this. Let me think of a good example. All right, and I'm not sure this isn't so good. Okay, what animal was that? Do you know your dinosaurs? Triceratops, okay? This is supposed to be a rhinoceros. I'm not really sure, it's not a very good one. I'm better at drawing dinosaurs than rhinos, okay? The similarity is that they have horns on their faces, okay, which is an offensive, a fighting thing. It may have other functions as well. This is an extinct dinosaur, reptile, okay? This is much later living mammal. Now, in terms of evolution, they all go back to fish and things like that, but the similarities here is more recent. One solution to being able to protect yourself and fighting off predators, because they both were plant eaters, these were not meat eaters, they were using it for defense, is to build some kind of weapon on your face that you can fight with. So purely separately, the Triceratops and the rhinoceros, and other animals as well, developed the idea of the horn, but they're not connected. It's not like that, okay? The Triceratops is not the ancestor of the rhino, and it's not like that, except that they all go back to fish, back ultimately in the ancient times, but that's not the question here in terms of the immediate development. So sometimes certain ideas, certain problems can lead to similar solutions, okay? Similar appearance, similar words, whatever, similar ideas, whatever it might be, but there doesn't have to be a direct or an indirect connection between them. So, what do we think about this then? What do we suggest is going on here? Is it that they both go back to an original account of God's revelation? Do we think that the Sikhs are borrowing the ideas of the Zoroastrians in terms of how you meet God and things like that? Or is it that they're just similar versions of the idea of meeting God or whatever? I've deliberately chosen, I haven't included Islam here, because then you would say, well, that one's the true one and that one isn't true, but they're both not true as far as you're concerned as non-believers of Zoroastrianism and non-believers of Sikhism. So, any ideas here? How can we compare these? And what does it mean? We've seen similarities. Similarities are interesting. That means something's going on, perhaps. Can we come up with an idea, do you think? Is there another possibility beyond my three things here? No one? Got a suggestion? Do you think the two religions are connected? Do you think Sikhs, Guru Nanak or whatever, at the end of the 16th century in northern India, was aware of Zoroastrian ideas? Sorry? Maybe. How? Okay, good point. It's not just in Iran, but in the 16th century, in what is now India, there were actually Zoroastrians, Parsis living, mainly in Bombay, which is a long distance away from the Punjab, but who knows, maybe their ideas and thoughts were filtering out or something like that, though they're a fairly closed community these days and probably then. So that's a possibility. We can't say straight away, no, there's no connection, because we've got this Indian link, which at least you could use to argue for scenario number 2, if we want to call it this one. Okay. What about this one? Any chance we could argue that they both come from the same original source?
Back in the 101 course, that was this.
Back in the day.
In Mesopotamia, there was this king, and he was telling this story that when he was a baby, he was put in the river, just like in Moses. And we see the same story repeated by different actors in the course of the history. So I think this could be the same thing here. I mean, we see religions actually affect each other. They share similarities, and sometimes when one religion creates a concept and the other takes it and make it further claims on it. So I think we can think about it like the same source but different
Interpretations. Yes. So there were stories, whether true or not is not so much of a concern for us, but there were stories going round about someone going up into heaven and meeting God or whatever, just as there were stories about an important guy being put into the river and becoming Moses and so on. And different people write down their version of this story at one point or another. And so you could argue that, yes, this is an ongoing tradition of how people describe their encounter with God or something like that. Zoroastrianism obviously much, much earlier than Sikhism, but then you can see similarities with other religions in between as well. And what about this one here? Could it be that they are just similar ways of dealing with the same problem, which is, where does my religion come from? Okay, we don't believe in Zoroastrianism, so we don't believe that Zoroaster went up to God, so he presumably and some other guys made it all up. Okay, we don't believe in Sikhism, so we don't believe that Guru Nanak had his encounter with God either, so he must have made it up. Okay, or he and some other people made it up. Okay, so in that case we've got two sets of people at different times thinking about, I've got a religion, how do I explain it? How do I justify that? So they're coming up with a similar solution, which is that God has taken me up and told me that this is the truth.
They want to make people believe their ideas, and maybe they come up with those myths, and they try to say that you should be a good person, like fairy tales. They want to give a message, but also they want to affect people, and they come up with the discussion with God.
Right, okay, it gives it more power, okay.
Every religion chooses the same way.
Because it's an obviously very good way to do it. If you just say, please be a good boy, because being good is a nice thing to do, you think, well, all right, but I don't want to be a good boy today or whatever. But if we say, please be a good boy because that's what I'm telling you, because God told me, then you might think, all right, I'll be a good boy, whatever, things like that. So yeah, that's something similar. So believing in God or gods has a very strong effect upon us because it's something we have no control over. Okay, if you can control being a bad boy and I won't find out, you'll carry on. But God is omniscient. God knows everything. So God will know if you're being a good boy or a bad girl, and then will reward you or punish you later. So if you believe that, it's a very powerful way. So yeah, you could say, and you're focusing just on the moral side, the ethical side of religion, and suggesting that again, a number of people have got their ideas about God, but also about ethics, and they're trying to support that with this idea that it's come from God, that God took me up into heaven, or God came down to me, and therefore you better watch out because I'm the prophet, I know about it, and he's up there, or it's up there, and it'll get you or something. So that's another possibility. Probably in all the different religions we've got some of all of this. Different religions have influenced each other. Many religious traditions go back to similar sources earlier in the past, but they're also reacting to similar situations. So probably there's a bit of all of these things if we compare different religions. We only got 2 of them here, very far apart in time. We bring closer religions. We saw already Hinduism and Islam were affecting the Sikh religion, okay, directly in that sense, or whatever, okay. We can talk about the influence of the Jewish traditions on the Christians and on Islam, okay, very important in that part of the world. But also in all of the cases, I think there is this, what we might call polygenetic factor as well. It's just an obvious way to do things, an obvious way to solve that problem. All right, okay, we've got a few minutes left, so we need to do this thing here. Let me close the computer. I'm not supposed to be here when you do that. They've changed the format a little bit.